poll. Daniel is currently the engineering manager at Phoenix International, which is a company that provides marine engineering and operational services in water depths from 0 to 6,000 meters. His work includes a wide variety of robotic developments in harsh environments, including space, deep sea, and theme parks. You might have an example of that theme park. He also worked at the Marine Spill Response Corporation's Research and Development Department, where he worked on development of fire-resistant oil containment boom and an in-situ burn igniter. And what he is talking to us about today is an AUV deployable in-situ burn igniter. So take it away, Daniel.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me here. I'm presenting an AUV on an AUV launch spill igniter, and this is another BSEE project under the guidance of Karen Stone. We are conducting this in we're actually on the second generation of this igniter. The first one was done starting in 2017 and ran through 2018. So before I get into the igniter, I want to just talk a little bit about why Phoenix, because we've never presented at this conference before, and we're really not known in the oil spill cleanup community. What we do is work around the world in all sorts of water, as was mentioned, from 0 to 20,000 feet. We have our own AUVs, which we often build payloads for. We also operate them for the supervisor of salvage for the US Navy, where we also do a little bit of work on oil lightering. For instance, they asked us to look at a system to identify the water oil line within tanks within submerged vessels. The other thing we have is we have a lot of underwater welding experience. And when I say underwater welding experience, if you look at the lower left pictures, I'm talking about divers actually welding with welding tools within the water. And also to the right, you can see we work in some pretty cold places. That's an AUV in Norway, and also that's a diver working on a ship in the Antarctica. So when BSEE was interested in an AUV launched igniter, we thought, well, one of the things we do is we use exothermic cutting rods underwater, and these are used to burn the hulls of steel ships. And we figured if those things can work underwater and stay lit, then we can probably do something with them to ignite a spill. The other thing is that we also work with a lot of high temperature brazing gases in the use of that, in that execution of that underwater welding work. The other things we thought is, well, we know you want to stay away from the spill as much as possible. So we know that we can remotely deploy it from an AUV, and that we can also use remote control to ignite. And because of our experience working worldwide, we knew that we wanted to build it out of everything that was widely available, commercial off-the-shelf parts. So the picture there is what is an exothermic cutting rod, and the way those typically work is you feed oxygen through them, and then a diver will actually spark them by striking them against the hull of the ship. So along with our design considerations were the requirements we were given by BSEE, and you can see there that we had to meet wave and wind and current. And one of the things is that BSEE felt like we should focus on making sure that the system ignited much more than it was than focus on the AUV deployment. And so that's where our focus was. And what you see is a rendering of the system we ended up developing. And the system we ended up developing used two sources of ignition. One was it used the exothermic cutting rod I discussed, and also used a second system where we pushed a liquid fuel out with some pressurized welding gases. And to the left of that is the remote control we used to start the ignition. So at Phoenix, we always like to build stuff quickly, and we like to get out there and test it. So that's exactly what we did. And to meet those requirements, we created some of our own methodology for doing that. You'll see in the upper left, that's us using just a very simple blower to generate some wind, and the kind of and that's the igniter is in that white tank, and you can kind of see the top of it just broaching the surface, the yellow top of it kind of to the right. The upper right is a test we did using current. And then the other test we did is we actually completely submerged the entire system. And as you can see, that it didn't matter. We're not depending on anything. We're not depending on air to create combustion for what we're doing. And again, that's from what we learned doing underwater welding. We also did an ice test, quiescent tests. And one of the things is that during the ice test, all along we were making measurements, collecting data, of course, and during the ice test we were able to achieve a 700 degree C temperature. Here's just some test data, burn time test data that we collected along the way. And we're really, one of the things is we're kind of limited in what we could do because we're working in our facility at Phoenix, which we don't have a burn permit for. So we relied on dodecaine as a fuel that we could safely burn. And the thing is, for the total igniter duration, we never let the system burn completely. So we always were extinguishing the ignition, except if you look at the very bottom, we did what we called the engineering quiescent demo. And because what we wanted to learn was what would happen if we just had water in a tank and we had no dodecaine and we just relied on our system of the exothermic cutting rod and the liquid fuel being pushed out. And as you see, the system burned for pretty much 15 minutes just on its own in a pool of water. So although we were happy with what we did, and Bessie was happy with what we did, it was a prototype. And we could estimate that when we finished the system, we were at now TRL 4. And so we had some work to do to make it better, make it more reliable. The first thing was we wanted to look at the ignition system. And again, we were using two separate sources of ignition. We were igniting the exothermic rod, and then we were separately burning gelled fuel, liquid fuel. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to combine it into what we call the coaxial igniter, and that's the design model for it is to the right, and then the picture in the center are multiple copies that we made. And what this does is it combines the exothermic rod inside a sealed tube, and around that rod, after it ignites, a gelled fuel is pushed through, and now we decided to use propane. And the reason we didn't feel we needed any special gas, and we also wanted to be able to use, again, as commonly found parts as we could. And so we're just using a tank of propane, and we're using actually for the for the exothermic rod, we're using a tank of oxygen, and both of these you can literally go down to Home Depot and buy them, because that's what we do. And so we did many tests on these, and we found that this method of igniting the exothermic rod was very reliable. Again, I just want to remind you that typically these exothermic rods are ignited by providing a lot of energy to them, a lot of electricity to them, and then striking them against a large metal ship. Neither of those two things which we had. The other thing we wanted to focus on was the battery system. We wanted to use a common off-the-shelf battery. It kind of made us rethink how we were approaching our electronics. We had originally submerged all our electronics. We had potted them such that there would be no water intrusion, and now we've put them in a case. And then lastly, which I've already discussed a little bit, we wanted to focus on the fuel dispensing system. And this time we used we're now using a gel diesel, and we're actually using it at freezing temperatures. And so we've demonstrated the ability to ignite with the system pretty much at any temperature. The other thing is we needed to focus on the original intent, which is develop an AUV launch model. And now, unlike the first time where we were only testing in our backyard, we're now going to go to Corel and test the system. Very similar test parameters to what we had in the first go round. I won't spend much time on them, but really the most important one here is that we're going to encounter frazzle ice at Corel. The other thing is we're also going to use emulsified crude. Here's the system as it ended up being completed. And you can see that we got a little lucky weather-wise, I guess. We got some snow and some ice. So when we're doing our testing in-house at Phoenix, we basically repeated all the tests we did at for Gen 1. We didn't have to go out and buy any ice. It came from the sky for us. And we were able to achieve 900 degrees C during that ice test. The other thing we did is we completed our AUV mockup. We actually built two of them. The one on the right is what would be considered a full-size mockup. That's for a 21-inch vehicle, which is a vehicle we own and operate. One thing about our AUV mockup is we're not relying on the AUV to do really anything. We're really just we're just asking the AUV to release, basically open the doors, and everything else happens within the system itself. We receive no power from the AUV, and we don't actually even communicate with the AUV. The other one on the left is we created a smaller mock-up because we wanted to test within that smaller white tank how the system would breach the surface and then ignite. So I have a couple short videos here. On the left, you'll see a release of the igniter from the bottom of the tank with the mock-up I just showed you. And one thing to note is that we've designed it such that the coaxial igniter sticks up significantly above the surface. And that's because we know that whatever we encounter on the surface, we want to be above it. And the next video is it's just a little later in that test showing the ignition of the igniter. And you can see it's a pretty robust ignition. a pretty consistent ignition. And the video won't last the entire time, but as the system burns, you can see that that tube, which is part of the coaxial igniter, will eventually get consumed. And as that does, it just continues to spray gelled fuel onto the surface. And one thing to keep in mind here is that this is actually burning while that essentially it's a wind test. So it's against that wind. And you can see, even though the wind is blowing, it's still igniting. Actually, the ignition grows in the direction of the wind. All right, so where are we in this process? We're actually right in the middle of our testing. So I showed you some testing that we did at Phoenix. We're located just outside the Beltway in Maryland, outside Washington, D.C. And so next week we're off to the Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute, and this is this is a place that we can burn crude at. We've been generously given our 10 gallons of hoops, and we are at the moment emulsifying them at our facility in Maryland. Then at the end of March, we are headed to Corel. We're very excited, and it'll be our first really large scale demonstration of our igniter. The other thing we need to do is we need to demonstrate that we can use what's really our larger mock-up to demonstrate that we can launch our AUV from a deeper depth. And we have the ability to do that at our tank in Phoenix. So that's my presentation. Again, thanks to Bessie for everything. The other thing is I really want to thank the engineering team at Phoenix. Just as luck would have it, we signed this contract, I believe it was on March 9th or 10th of 2020. As you can imagine, it's not been easy to do this with people working remotely, and then in our case, people being able to come and work we have a rather large warehouse of about 70,000 square feet. So it makes it's easy for social distancing there. And my team has really done a great job of being able to come in and work diligently and responsibly. So thanks to them. And that's my presentation. So any questions?
All right, thanks, Daniel. Interesting stuff.
Thank you.
Lindsay, do we have any questions?
Yes, from Susan Krala. Did you consider designing the igniter to float vertically so the body would be completely underwater?
We did think about that. The problem is that there's a couple things in the way that the flow of the gases and the fluids would be affected. And then the other thing is that we wanted to keep in mind that it eventually has to be launched from an AUV, and the layout of most AUVs supports that more horizontal configuration.
Okay, thanks. Well, we're actually, well ahead of time, and as much as we don't want to be too far behind time, and there's actually enough time for me to ask you, since there's time, give us one example of the robotics that you developed for use in the extreme environments of theme parks.
It's funny because the thing about theme parks is that you don't think of them as some sort of harsh environment, except maybe when you have young kids there spilling stuff everywhere. But the thing about theme park rides is they run once a minute for at least 18 hours a day. The other thing is that the rides, the main ride I developed was I developed a set of Jaws animatronics sharks for Universal Studios Japan, and they actually use it. They place it in brominated water, and it's like, oh, you don't think chlorine is harsh enough? Well, let me give you some bromine, and it's actually it's there's a lot of things out there that are designed to work in chlorine, but bromine just makes things worse. And so it's just this combination of fatigue and just really harsh water that made that engineering really interesting.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Sure.